Welcome to another edition of Strange New Pod. I am your Fleet Admiral and host, Julian Brown, alongside the best bridge crew this side of Pac-Led Planet. We have Commander Hawk and Captain Giraffe. Are you Fleet Captain now, Giraffe, because we did the promotion thing again?
No, I'm always the captain.
You're just always the captain now. It is Captain Giraffe. Welcome back. Welcome aboard. How are you guys doing before we introduce our special guests? Good.
Yeah,
great.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
Happy to be back after like a week off.
Oh,
that felt
a whole
like 3
week
weeks,
off.
a whole month, a year. Eons.
Hawk again has the appropriate background from Star Trek 6. I'm loving that. As everybody on Twitch can see, we have two very special guests joining us on the view screen tonight. Please welcome Josh Gilliand and Nari Ely from the Legal Geeks. Welcome aboard.
Good evening.
Pleasure to be here.
It is awesome to have you guys. When it comes to these two trials, Giraffe said, "Hey, I know people.
I know the people.
I know the people. They can talk about this stuff all day." And I was like, "This is perfect because I don't know a lot about law. I can theorize. I can, as we were saying before we went live, talk out of my ass all I want." And all we want, but you guys are the experts. We're very excited to have you guys on. Before we ask you about your history with Star Trek and stuff, tell us a little bit about what Legal Geeks is and what you guys do.
Absolutely. So it's a pleasure to be here. I didn't know that meeting Giraffe at San Diego Comic Fest would lead to this, but here we are. Jessica Meterson and I started the Legal Geeks on March 12th, 2012. So we just had our 10th anniversary.
Congrats.
Nice. We're nerds who love talking about the law and science fiction and pop culture. So whether it's the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Star Trek, Star Wars, Dune, Flash Gordon, we'll talk about it because there's lots of great legal analysis, such as all the lessons about contract law from Firefly. Or one of my early blog posts was about the assumption of risk in wearing a red shirt in Star Trek.
Okay, yeah.
which the original series, I mean, again, highest fatality rate. I mean, the only thing higher would be commanding officer of the Battlestar Pegasus, which is 75% fatal.
Yeah.
Or being a mom in a Disney movie. And
oh my God.
Only thing with a higher death rate. So it's great to be here. I love Star Trek, and I'll let Nari joined us a few years ago. She's been my first officer on lower decks and kaiju related topics. So yes.
I want to take a quick opportunity to, as we sometimes do when we're doing stuff for the Legal Geeks, give a quick disclaimer that nothing we say today should be construed as legal advice.
Very smart disclaimer. Get that right out of the way. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Purely for entertainment only.
Yeah.
Occasional. Yeah. Don't go out and steal a starship. No.
But they said I could have the access codes.
Just because Artemis 1 is on the launch pad doesn't mean you get to take it for a spin.
How excited are we about that? I am so excited. I am so excited. Oh,
yeah. Yes. I have to say that I met the Legal Geek for the first time at San Diego Comic Con. The one that happened in November.
What was it called? It was called
the
Special Edition, right?
Yeah. And I was in the room because there was a Star Trek panel after you guys. I was one of these people. And I was like, that sounds interesting. And it was about law in Christmas carols and Christmas stories. And it was so epic. I laughed throughout the thing. And actually, there's some picture that you took during the panel. And you see me, I'm on first row. And I'm just like in like a Star Trek uniform. And I had so much fun. And when I met you again at the San Diego Comic Fest, and you were like, "Oh, I'm Josh, I'm from the Legal," I was like, "Oh, I went to your panel. It was so good." And I have to say that Josh is the person who convinced me and helped me to become a panelist at Comic-Con and started my newfound career as a Star Trek panelist. So thank you so much for your help and your inspiration, Josh.
Here to serve.
Hey, there it is.
I loved your archaeology panel. That was a lot of fun. made my way out to the library in San Diego. Good to see it. You guys did great. So hats off to you for that.
Thank you so much.
I wish we had that on video. I really do. Next time.
Maybe for Doctor Wu,
Maybe
doing
for
it
Dr.
again.
Who,
Maybe
yeah.
we'll record it this
Yeah.
time.
No, it was a lot of fun. Josh, Nari, I do every time we have guests on, I like to ask, what your history is with Trek. If you have a history with Trek, and if so, what your favorite Trek is, who your favorite character is, and your favorite episode, putting you both on the hot seat a little bit.
Nari, why don't you go first?
Sure. My history with Trek is watching episodes of Deep Space Nine and Next Generation. I believe as they were coming out live with my dad when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And then later, once internet streaming video became a thing and the entire Star Trek library went on Netflix and other things, going through and watching the original series and all of the movies and then on to Voyager and things like that. And it's just been, a huge part of my life, a huge part of my fandom ever since. My favorite series is Deep Space Nine. I love virtually everything Trek, but that one has a special place in my heart for the way that it deals with really difficult, interesting social questions and moral questions with compelling characters. My favorite character is Worf. So
Nice.
And he obviously
that's the first.
I think that is a first. I think that's a
I think
first.
it is.
Yeah.
Oh,
okay.
It's a good one.
Yes. So, and I think my favorite episode, I mean, I have favorite episodes that just make me joyous, and it's tough to give you a firm answer, but I would actually have to say if I have to pick one.
Yeah, it's hard.
I think the one that resonated with me the most and really stuck with me may be, and you're gonna have to forgive me because I'm blanking on the name, but it's the episode in which Dr. Bashir and O'Brien go inside the mind of a Section 32 operative and have their sort of deep existential conversation about friendship and romance and relationships. And there's a moment where O'Brien and Bashir turns to O'Brien and says, "I know you love Keiko, but I like you just a little bit more."
Yes.
and it goes vice versa. And O'Brien has a hard time admitting it. But just that relationship between love and friendships, and that one really stuck.
That's not our man Bashir, is it? No, that's like
No,
that's
it's
the
not.
that's the
Omran Bashir
holodeck
is the
one.
holodeck, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm asking the Twitch chat, but so far
They'll come up with it. That's a great episode.
Yeah.
Amen.
they're like the collective mind of the podcast, and they're like, when we blank on something, they're like, "That's the name of the episode." I was like, "Okay, thank you."
Yeah.
They practically give you the name of the caterer for the show.
It's true.
Yeah.
It's true. Josh, how about you?
So this is a little deep. I remember watching the animated series.
Okay. Nice.
Yes.
I remember seeing the motion picture at the drive-in with my dad,
Wow.
and the scene with Spock holding Kirk's hand in the sick bay with despite all of his knowledge, he doesn't understand this, took more meaning after my dad had a stroke and I was saying goodbye to him, because it was holding his hand. And I've always associated Star Trek with my dad since he was in charge of building, installing the tiles on the Space Shuttle Columbia. The fast forward, there was the tearful car ride after watching Wrath of Khan, staring out the window, sobbing hysterically. And Star Trek has always been there. When I was in the 8th grade, nearly died from Crohn's disease, had emergency surgery, my godmother worked some magic, and I got a get well card from Leonard Nimoy.
Oh my God.
And fast forward to 2009, Nimoy was the keynote speaker at a legal computer forensic conference. And I sat towards the front, and there was 900 people in there. And so I was like in the first 30 to get up there, and people had signing autographs, and he stayed and signed, talked to everybody. So I get up there, shake his hand, and just say, like, "Hey, when I was a kid, I nearly died. You sent me a get well card. that really meant the world to me, and I just wanted to thank you. And then I started moving away. It was then that his right hand came down on my shoulder. So I have experienced the Vulcan nerve.
Oh,
He stopped me 3 times to ask questions. He was gracious and sweet and looked so humble and genuine in getting to talk to him. So I've always loved Trek. It's, again, going through college and law school, it was Deep Space Nine and Voyager. After law school, we had Enterprise. But for a favorite episode, probably Darmok,
yes.
because
yeah.
learning to communicate is pivotal to having peaceful relations. Close second, and this might depend on my mood, is Balance of Terror. Like when I found out my dad died, I sat down and put on Balance of Terror and just watched Star Trek for about 5 hours. So again, big fan. I do like looking at humanity through the eyes of Spock and Worf, because it highlights that you can have diversity in the Federation between a logic-based society and a honor-based society that both strive to have the same goal despite being radically different. So, huge fan of Trek. And I just share with Draft, I do have an autographed T-shirt from TimeCon in 1985 that has the autographs of James Doohan, George Takei, and Walter Koenig. And in
Like
the lower-
anytime I try to brag about like something I have from Trek, like Josh like sent me an incredible item. And I was like,
I've just got one thing. It's a signed picture of Worf signed by Michael Dorn, and it's
nice.
amazingly my partner found it at a Goodwill.
Oh, wow.
And
Okay.
fortunately, he knows me well enough to know this is worth a lot to Nari.
I should
Nari,
buy this.
if I'm in a convention, I will get you a signed autograph with your name. I will make it my my mission.
your honor, on your Klingon honor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will
On
find
your
Michael
Romulan
Dorn and get
honor,
on my Romulan honor.
which doesn't go a
yes.
long way with the Klingons, but we will forget about that for a second. Wow, both of your stories, just bravo, wonderful, beautiful. Just
And
I love Trekkies. I love this community so much.
The Twitch chat came through, and the
did.
name of the episode is Extreme Measures.
That's right.
Yep.
Thank you so much, Twitch chat.
Twitch chat is awesome.
I remember watching that while I was at Davis. So yeah,
It's a good one. It's screwy because they're in Sloane's head. It's wild. It's
as he
great.
dies.
Yeah. Yep. If you haven't figured it out yet, this week we are going to take a look at and analyze the upcoming trials of both Commander Unachin Riley and Captain Carol Freeman, obviously with the Legal Geeks helps. Do they have a case at all? What kind of trouble are they in? Should they be in trouble at all, right? And we're going to get into all of that. But before we do, Giraffe, it is back to you. It comes back very quickly because Eric's on vacation. We need to thank our collective members at the Ready Room level and above, please.
Thank you, dear patrons, and sorry for butchering your name. But somebody will do better next week, I know. So thank you. Simon Steiger, Jeff Reeve, Mariah Gossett, Jen Stein, Tina Alexander, Joe Saporito, Noe Santos, Kring Hui, Heaven, Takako Nagumo, Kara Kennedy, Mark, Fernanda Nogales, SMK, Ian Davis, Laura Linderman, Colian Night Spray,
Reasonable stranger.
Reasonable Stranger,
There it is.
Colin Davidson, Jesse Desmond, Alan Davis, Shadowhand 2949, sorry, Jesco, MC Fridays, Maggie, Michael Graham, Emily and Travis, Gildera, Cassie, Raul, Samarichi, supporter of human rights. Hello.
Hey.
Maggie Light, Canada. Just Canada. Wayne Ritz, Scone of Arc, Sean, Jay Howard, Anna Yurdadon, Ella, and Mahe Alani Uchiyama.
Yay!
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll do what I just did for patrons, and then Giraffe, you can update with anything you have. We just released for 1 week early access because we're behind. They are usually a month, but we're doing them for a week this time. Our Orville episodes 5 through 8 of New Horizons review, that's up right now. That'll be available to everyone next Wednesday, and then also next Wednesday for patrons. Episodes 9 through 10, the finale and a season wrap up, will be available in the next week for everybody else. So those bonus pods are flying out, and then we're going to come up with some new ones. We're also going to be, Karen and I are going to be starting the cooking with Captain Pike and naughty ex-captain girlfriend. It'll be fun. We're going to do those videos for you guys. Jeff, anything else patron?
Yeah, because I'm a queen of patrons.
You are a patron saint.
Patron saint, absolutely. So first of all, I will be in Star Trek Las Vegas. It's next weekend, next week's weekend. Yeah, so I'll be here only the weekend. Find me, say hi. I have stickers, and I'll be cosplaying as Nev and then as the Romulan commander. So if you see me around, come say hi, please. And September is going to be yet again the month of our table read. So please send us some recommendation and ideas for the next table read of September.
If it's not Lower Decks, don't even bother sending in your recommendations. Kidding. That's a joke. We want all your recommendations. But seriously,
I will
Lower
decide
Decks.
anyway. So
yeah, there you go. That's it? Good?
Yeah, that's it.
Good? All right.
Yes.
Before we get into the whole shebang, let's do the strange new loop. Last week, we asked you guys, and this is also going to be the mailbag question later on in the show, who you would go and put back on trial in Star Trek. Well, this week we're asking, who's got a bit of a bad rap, right? Like, who got like the shit end of the stick? If you could pardon anyone in the Star Trek universe, who would it be and why? We'll start with our guests, Josh or Nari. You can fight for who wants to go first there.
Fight.
Well, I have at least an initial thought. And I think, like I said at the beginning, for the most part, I feel like Star Trek legal proceedings have been pretty good. And I don't know that there's anybody that I would necessarily pardon because they got a really bad shake in the justice system. But I have one thought, which is Tuvix.
Oh!
I'm going to leave now. Goodbye.
Which wasn't really a legal proceeding. I do think it was arguably an execution. And you know, it comes close second to what I mentioned as my favorite episode, just because it's one of those episodes, which I think is great, where it presents characters that we love making a difficult choice, and I believe at least it suggests to us that they're making the wrong choice for totally understandable reasons. But you know, there's a being here, they're self-conscious, they believe probably correctly that their existence will end if they're separated into their constituent persons. Yeah, I think he should have been pardoned.
Oddly enough, this was my choice last week.
Yeah, and I almost left then too.
I would have put Janeway on trial in that for the murder of Tuvix.
Nari's talked about that with our WonderCon panel that we were in for 2020 that was virtual. So listen to that recording.
Ooh,
Totally. Hawk, I think you're onto something there. That was there's a serious argument that was a summary execution without a fair trial.
I will say, even though I'm not a fan of the Tuvix argument, it does get brought up in the Janeway autobiography, and Starfleet does grill her about it, whether she made the right choice. So it is and I guess will continue and remain so, a very hot topic.
Oh yeah,
Star
and
Trek.
what I mean, I don't mean to suggest she obviously made the
Oh
wrong
no,
choice.
I
That's
know,
a hard
I like to
call.
joke about it too, because I'm just like, ugh.
And I love Janeway. Don't get me wrong.
Love it. Josh, how about you?
Humanity.
Yeah.
Because Q's trial was fundamentally unfair. You can't be both the prosecution and the judge.
It's true. I like that answer.
At least not in our system of law. there are systems of laws that are not ridiculous. I'm trying to remember, I think specifically South Africa, I believe, has a system in which the judge is both sort of not necessarily the prosecutor, but the investigator investigating the charges as well as the judge, which I'm not saying that's better or worse. It is different.
Yeah, but Q's trial that didn't. Well,
No, that was
after
not South
Picard-
African law either. I'll just say that.
after Picard season 3, it arguably did end. But I would say, no, I would pardon humanity because that shows atonement and change, and that Star Trek aspires to be better than let's talk about the time that we murdered all of those people, because you can't just judge in a society for one instance.
Yeah. I think a lot of what like the Q continuum or just Q's, trial of humanity comes down to is that I think he just really wanted a friend, because like you watch the end of Picard season 2 and you're like, I think that he was just like giving him shit for 10, 20, 30 years. Like he just wanted a buddy to like pick on. And I think he expresses that at the end. I don't know. It's a good, I like the answer a lot though, because it was still very much like a sham trial for sure.
I have one.
Yeah, go ahead.
Michael Burnham.
Yeah, that's in the chat too. Great answer. Yep.
Yeah,
Come on.
Yep.
Come
could have
on.
been
Mike.
shot.
Yeah.
Yeah, thrown out an airlock. You
Yeah.
don't get to hazard a vessel. Start a war because your feelings are hurt and you commit mutiny and it leads to billions of people dying and you get a mulligan. Lock her up.
Ooh.
But the thing is that if she had gone with the Vulcan hello, the war
There'd
could
be
have
no
been
war.
avoided.
Yeah.
And they know that at the end, and she still like gets a bad rap for the mutiny when she tried to save everybody.
I think the easy
So, I don't
answer
know.
is just blame Sarek. If you have to ask, it's just blame Sarek at all
Yeah,
times.
well, that's because Georgia wouldn't listen to Sarek. So you have that
Yeah.
as well of, I don't want to listen to him. Therefore, I'm going to start a war.
So
Oh, sorry,
yeah?
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, potentially previewing a little bit of what we're going to talk about. I do want to agree with Josh that, generally speaking, the fact that your choice would have worked out well, the fact that like if your mutiny had succeeded, it actually would have had good consequences. Isn't really the most important thing when it comes to deciding whether or not someone broke the law. Now, there's all kinds of other considerations that could come in terms of, if you're arguing that I had good intentions or even that it had good results. But on the simple question of, was it a mutiny? the answer is always, you're looking at the actions and not necessarily. Yeah,
I have a question though. It's a legit question. So when you're like a first officer and you see the captain taking a decision that is endangering everybody's life, can you do something about it?
Yes, to a certain extent. So there's
shooting
ways
her with phaser is a no.
Not usually, no. So there's ways to do that in the sense that you can relieve somebody of command if you think that they are, if you think that they are acting in a way that is endangering the ship, if they seem to be unwell or if they just seem to be out of their right mind. And we've seen this in Star Trek before, that the chief medical officer can on the spot relieve the captain of duty. You can also refuse to obey orders and then face the potential consequences. You do have to face potential consequences. It's one of the reasons why, that kind of step should not be taken lightly. But at the same time, chain of command is important. So generally speaking, there have been court-martials where soldiers have claimed, I believe this order was unlawful, for example, and so therefore did not follow it. And the bar is pretty high. It has to be pretty clearly unlawful. It really helps you if it really it is unlawful in retrospect, and things like that. So it's a high bar. You got to be really sure, but you can do it and then argue that the order my captain gave was unlawful.
I want to read. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
It has to be unlawful on its face, so it's patently wrong.
Right. It's not debating back and forth. If you can debate about it, you should just obey.
It's like we've done a lot of blog posts on illegal orders from Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and Star Wars.
Yeah.
And the examples are, POW was told to lie down, face down, and then an airman shot the guy in the back of the head. War crime. There is absolutely no doubt that was illegal and should not have been done. So it's it when you see it type of situation. And the case that helps set some of the standards for it that deals with Aaron Burr, gets into the issue that it's repugnant to reason to follow an illegal order. So So the test is there. But looking at Burnham and Giorgio, Burnham wasn't justified in, subduing a commanding officer. Like that's a disagreement. Like this isn't a Crimson Tide situation of do we have an
Love
order
that
to
movie
launch the
so
nukes?
much.
It's an issue of I think this is the right plan and I don't agree with you.
And Josh, I agree, but I don't care because the Twitch chat is with me.
Well, and this is what I've been trying to say. I want to read NY Relite's comment from Twitch here because I think this is very important. I've come to the opinion that the war would have started regardless of whether Michael had fired on the ship. She got a bad rap for that, but she did commit mutiny. Now, 100%, she committed mutiny. She's guilty of mutiny no matter what happens after. I will say I disagree. I think that had Michael had the opportunity to fire, that things would have gone very different. To Kuvma,
look at Equality of Mercy and Balance of Terror.
Yeah, but the ends don't justify the means. And in failure to carry out the mutiny,
but she shouldn't be. But Michael shouldn't be held responsible for starting the war because she didn't, and she gets held responsible for it, which I think is where it's not cool. That's where I'm at.
Yeah, she can be judged for mutiny. We agree. But then Spock says that there's never been mutiny in Starfleet.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well. The
maybe there hasn't been one reported
on record.
They could have captured the torchbearer, and instead she shot him because she was upset that Giorgio died. So if she had carried out the mission, that could have avoided starting the war.
Yeah.
If I could contribute one more thought on this, I do think that
a thing.
Well, I think that it's important that heroes sometimes take actions like that when they're convinced that they're correct, and we often respect that. I do think it's important though that hero has to be willing to face consequences. Maybe those consequences don't materialize because for some of the things we're going to talk about, like prosecutorial discretion and all these other things, they don't want to charge the hero, but the willingness to face the consequences and take responsibility, to me, is an important aspect of being a hero.
Exactly. Admiral Kirk pled guilty to stealing the Enterprise and all the events to save, at the time, what he thought was just Dr. McCoy and Spock's immortal soul. They had a good necessity defense argument for stealing the Enterprise. It was imperfect because they need to show that Dr. McCoy's life was in immediate danger. He was going insane slowly and would ultimately die. So like the immediacy factor is stretched for that necessity defense. But Kirk doesn't do that. There's no Samuel Cogley there to argue for all of those officers. They fall on the sword, and because of what they did, they're like, just gonna knock him down to captain and ignore everything else because we all would be dead.
Do we know what she pleads at her trial?
She pleads guilty, I think.
She pleads guilty.
I don't even think we get.
I don't know. I don't remember.
I don't even remember if she gets a line, but you see like the very like shrouded court, which I didn't like either.
The future man.
Listen, Hawk has been waiting very, very patiently to go. So
that's okay.
I'm gonna let Hawk go.
It's a huge topic, and we have 2 lawyers on the show tonight. So yeah, this was gonna run long. I'll throw one out here. Roga Danar from The Hunted, season 3 of TNG.
That's like
they said he was responsible for war crimes, which was obviously a lie, and that he was in prison for what would be the rest of his life. And at the time, like I really empathized with the character. Obviously, as the planet wasn't a member of the Federation at the time, there was nothing really Starfleet could do about it, and they were obligated to return this escaped prisoner and that, but. It's the man got a raw deal like all around, and that he should have had some sort of advocacy, which didn't seem to exist for him.
It's a court episode, so I don't know.
Roga Danar was it was from season 3 of TNG. I don't know if you.
I remember the episode.
Yeah. He was an augmented soldier that, but once the war was over and the soldiers were returned to normal life.
I remember it. Yes.
This is coming back to me now.
Yeah, all their programming and their modifications and that it would kick in any sort of hostile situation and that, and there was violence associated with it. So all these augmented soldiers and that were placed in a prison moon, for any, for an indeterminate time. But
He-
basically the rest
he
of their
got
lives.
the absolute raw end of the deal there. They all did.
Yeah.
So I mean,
Mhm.
Yeah.
no.
But there was
agreed.
there was no advocacy group for them, like within their own community. The community just decided that it would be better if they just were placed in a place where they could be monitored all the time.
Yeah.
Isn't James Cromwell in that episode?
Yes, he is. He plays he plays like the
Prime
president of
Minister or something, right?
the prime minister and that, and he's the one. It was the will of the people.
Yeah, it's just 800 episodes to pick from. So yeah, not a
A great
exercise at
reminder
all.
that democracy is a process, not an outcome.
Right.
Oh boy.
It's not that I would give him a pardon, but I think that Thomas Riker deserved a lot better after the events of the episode Defiant from DS9. Whatever you say about the Maquis, I think the Maquis were on the right side of things, and I think the Federation probably realized a little bit too late that they were. And when Kira says, we'll come for you, like Thomas Riker knows that's an empty promise. Like once you're in Cardassian prison, you go away. Like it's like the Gulag. Most likely he's been executed or he died of malnutrition or 100 different things. But I do think they should have gone for him because I think the Maquis in general deserved better than what the Federation did for them. Whether you want to try them for war crimes or not, later on, but like make sure everybody's back and taken care of, and especially, Thomas Riker. Did he steal a starship? Yeah. Did he destroy a shit ton of Cardassian vessels? Yes. But at the same time, you went to war with Cardassia eventually, and Cardassia was up to no good, and I think that people needed to be forgiven for that, especially when it comes to the Maquis. So
I have a question that I can't remember. Did the Federation have an extradition treaty with Cardassia at that time?
I do not think that they did.
Yeah, so this is something that a lot of sci-fi shows I think get a little bit off. I think this came up in like season 2 of the Orville as well, with like, what are you going to do with this guy who's accused of destroying a bunch of krill ships? Which is that you don't necessarily need to turn them over even to an allied foreign power,
Yep.
much less one that you're currently neutral, formally hostile, unless you have an extradition treaty. And it's an important formality of law. It doesn't mean that the person gets off scot-free. You can try them yourself.
Yep.
For these crimes and imprison them yourself, but unless you have an extradition treaty, you really can't just ship off your citizens.
It's true. And there were a lot of like circumstances going on with that episode. Like Gul Dukat was on DS9. I think they had a treaty, so they were trying to make things work. I think this is before they went to war, so they were trying to make things work. But I think the Obsidian Order was deep down their throats, and they were threatening to basically destroy the Defiant. And if they didn't give them, they're basically rocking a hard place. Like what do you do in that situation? That being said, you get Section 31 involved, you get a Federation strike team, you get Tendi the cleaner, and you go get him back.
Tendi the cleaner.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
So, yep, that's mine. Any other thoughts on this? Should we get into it? Should we get into the trials? Yes. I see rubbing of hands. That's the good sign. Number one here. Number one. Starfleet Command versus Una-Chin Riley, Commander USS Enterprise. She will most likely stand accused of falsifying her Starfleet Academy entrance application, faking a DNA test. Nari, does that sum it up, or are there any other charges Una could be facing if we're going by some form of military law here?
Yeah, so you're basically correct. There's essentially like what's called the Uniform Code of Military Justice provisions that apply to military personnel. It has equivalents for a lot of what we would consider to be civilian crimes. And there's equivalents for both of the things that you just mentioned. So the first one, which would be falsifying or lying on her application, would be what's called fraudulent enlistment, appointment, or separation. Obviously, right here, we're talking about appointment because she's an officer. For shorthand, I'm just going to call it fraudulent enlistment because it's a little more evocative of what's going on. That would be for the people who actually want to look up the law out there. UCMJ Article 104A. The important elements here are that obviously you have to have been enlisted or appointed. You have to have knowingly misrepresented or deliberately concealed material facts. Here, I think, she knew. There's often there can be questions about whether or not you knew that something was false when you said it. I believe she knew that she was Illyrian when she's enlisted. Does that sound correct, everybody?
Yes, she knew. Yeah.
So that's not really an issue. And because of the anti-genetic modification directive, that means that she wouldn't have been appointed but for that misrepresentation or falsehood. So that's the third element. The enlistment or appointment has to have been obtained through that falsehood. And the last one is not really relevant here. It's that they were paid, but we assume that Una has been collecting a paycheck during this time. The second one is Article 107, false official statements. And so that would be, if she's faking a DNA test, if she's, maybe telling the chief medical officer during her mandatory annual exam, if she's required to disclose every year, okay, sir, are you human? Yes, I am human. Something along those lines. However, there's an important element in there, which is actually in the name of it, which is it has to be an official statement. And that one is a little bit dodgy in terms of what it means. It's been interpreted by court martials quite narrowly. So it's not necessarily every form you even sign. And so I'm not quite sure if they're going to get around that one, but I'll come back to that another time. The last one, though, is I presume she is going to also be charged under the Anti-Genetic Modification Directive, which I think is Starfleet Code of Conduct 587.63. You'll find less that you can Google in scholarship about that on the internet. Sorry, but because it has no UCMJ equivalent, thank God. It likely carries penalties. So some of the penalties that you can have in the UCMJ are discharge and things like that. So presumably it has a potential penalty of discharge if you're found to be serving in violation of it. I suspect that directive is the one that's doing most of the work here, because I don't know if all of you get the same sense, but the first two, they sound pretty ministerial.
Yeah.
They sound a little bit like citations. And for the most part, they're treated pretty lightly. They're not that severe.
Yeah, but Starfleet is very obviously because of what happened with the eugenics war. So, the anti-genetic modification directive, that's like a big deal for them. So yeah, I think that probably is the biggest one. Anything else on what she's possibly being charged with, Hawk, Draft, Josh?
I'll add a real example. I have friends in the Coast Guard and officers. One of the stories that they told was someone who was in the Coast Guard, graduated fairly high up from the Coast Guard Academy. He's an officer. He's doing his top secret clearance paperwork. And it's at that point that he finds out that he's not an American citizen, that his parents brought him into the United States illegally when he was a small child. So he didn't know that he wasn't from the United States. Not only was that a deal breaker in getting his top secret clearance, it bounced him out of the Coast Guard.
Wow.
Yeah. So, militaries take that stuff seriously. So for Una, there's actual intent here. So that's going to be problematic. But Nari's going to cover.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, there's also differences between continuing requirements to hold an office, which would maybe be something closer to anti-genetic modification directive. Unfortunately, for example, for your friend, but under the elements that I laid out for both of these UCMJ articles, you have to know that the statement is false when you're making it. You can't be charged with this for an innocent misrepresentation.
Got it.
This sounds an awful lot like Simon Tarsus and Drumhead and that one.
Oh my God, that's exactly what I want to say.
Yep. Yeah.
This is Drumhead part 2, but continue.
Yeah. We did have a question from Twitch from Haven. Where'd it go? I had it. The directive that you brought up, Nari, would that have been the same charge if Bashir had found out? If Starfleet had found out that Bashir was an augment?
Yeah, so I assume so. I think that there must be two different laws at issue in that episode because there's also eventually, right, his parents end up or his dad ends up going to jail. So my assumption is that there's at least two laws. One is Federation, one is Starfleet, and the Federation one penalizes parents for genetically modifying their children. And then I
And
assume
without
that
their
there is
knowledge
also
too.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And then I assume that there, yes, would be I unfortunately assume that this directive survives until Deep Space Nine, because otherwise it would not. His commission would not have been on the line during that.
Yeah. We're talking about, you know, possible repercussions for Una here, and that leads kind of to the next question: how hard can Starfleet go here? Because we see in the Strange New World season 1 finale, Quality of Mercy, it seems like they lock her away for a long time and doesn't have contact with anyone. If that's what you take from what La'an says to Captain Pike when she beams aboard. So yeah, what are we looking at here if she is, you know, found guilty?
So this is why I'm pretty sure it's the anti-genetic modification directive that has to be doing the work, because the first two ones that we talked about, which were fraudulent enlistment and false official statements, they both carry very low maximum penalties.
Yeah.
So fraudulent enlistment has a maximum of 2 years confinement, and that's a maximum. And from what I have researched, it's very rarely charged with jail time at all. The false statement also carries a maximum of 2 years. That one's in the manual for courts martial. You won't find it in the actual law, but it's in the manual. But again, that one is usually not. People don't usually get the maximum sentence for that. I will also note that for the fraudulent enlistment, in case anyone is thinking, but you know, every day she puts on the uniform, she is repeating the offense. There's actually a provision in the manual for courts martial for that one that there's only one offense.
One offense.
Even if you commit multiple acts that could be construed as fraudulent enlistment, you can only get charged for it once. But point being, those even adding up as much as you can with those, especially because I think the false statement one, they're going to have the hardest time proving their case for that one. The maximum she's looking at is a few years of incarceration. And so it's got to be the anti-genetic modification directive that's doing most of the work, which is unfortunate. For many reasons, people listening will probably have already concluded I am not a big fan of this law.
Yeah.
But you know, if they're threatening her with significant jail time, it has to be from that.
I'm very puzzled on how you can lie on a DNA test.
Well, that's what I keep going back to, and especially like with all the advanced technology in Star Trek. Like, how did she get past Starfleet unless she had a friend? You know?
Yeah, it's got to be that. Yeah, there's probably a co-conspirator there.
Yeah, yeah, that's kind of
and
like,
easy to,
There's
because
always ways around
nowadays,
it.
like I hope so, but you cannot be requested to get a DNA test, right? Is there any situation where you have to take a DNA test?
Well, I will
be
put it
enlisted or
this
something?
way. Not as far as I'm aware for being enlisted. However, there's a lot that you can do as a condition of employment, which is different from saying like it's by operation of law, I order you to go get a DNA test. It's essentially, you know, you can get this DNA test or I can fire you. And that's, for example, what happens. I know it sounds like a lot, but for example, that's
Certifying.
typically what happens when the members of the armed forces are required to get certain vaccinations.
yeah.
Yes. This is most recently politically salient, perhaps with COVID-19 vaccines, but it's been previously politically salient, or at least, sorry, not politically salient to armed service members because they get vaccinated for things that most people don't get vaccinated for. The vaccines carry serious risks. My partner was actually a former Green Beret, and he had the smallpox vaccine, which they still stab you with a needle a bunch of times, and it swells up and gets pussy, and people still sometimes go blind from that. And so the answer is that unless in exceptional circumstances, like in a time of war, there is a potential for the president to like order the armed forces to get certain medical procedures. For the most part, what we're doing, and I believe it's been done, for example, when there was fighting over the anthrax vaccine a couple decades ago, is it's simply a condition of employment. If it's really that important to you to not get the anthrax vaccine, you can leave.
I was kind of just assuming based on, you know, I would assume that the military or any military organization, at least in the United States, and I'm guessing in Starfleet too, make you do an entrance physical. So I would assume that they draw blood then and do blood work to make sure you're healthy. So that's kind of where I was getting the DNA test
I
initially.
think that's probably right. And even amongst us humans, DNA can tell you important things that affect how a doctor might approach a treatment, and things like that. It will tell you if you have like a predilection for cancer and things like certain types of cancer and things like that. So especially centuries from now, it wouldn't surprise me if that were a routine part of your entrance physical.
Do they actually state if there's a DNA scan as part of the Starfleet entrance?
I've never
procedure?
heard it as far as I know, but
Presumably, there's some pretty intense records that are kept
Yeah.
when you transport.
yeah, that too.
Yes,
Yep.
true.
Like
Yeah,
that.
but-
It has to be able to screen out organic things that are not you.
I mean, there's also the possibility that she had a blocker of some kind as part of her
Interesting.
biology.
Yeah.
So that way
Yeah.
she scans as human.
Yeah.
A
And-
Gorn blocker.
Ah. Yeah. My next one I want to talk about. We were talking about a co-conspirator. I don't consider Captain Pike a co-conspirator, but Una does have Captain Pike's support in a very big way. When she admits it to him, he's like, I don't care. You're the best first officer in the fleet. Like, well, what if Starfleet finds out? We'll deal with it when it gets to that. We have obviously gotten to that point now, but he is going to go to bat for her. Could he actually be tried as an accessory if Starfleet finds out that he knew?
So I think he's going to be okay. And the first thing is your instincts are absolutely right. I don't think he's a co-conspirator here, especially if what we're talking about is her initial fraudulent enlistment and things like that. That all happened before he found out.
Yeah.
The only thing that, as you just mentioned, could be maybe accessory after the fact. Accessory after the fact is basically any person who helps someone cover up a crime, or, for example, the prototypical example is you hide someone in your house when they're fleeing from the police. And so there is a UCMJ article for that. It's UCMJ article 78. But the reason why Captain Pike is almost certainly going to be okay here is because it has an express carve out in the manual for courts martial, which states that the mere failure to report a known offense will not make one an accessory after the fact. It does also say in the manual that it doesn't mean you're not off the hook for Article 92, which is refusing to obey an order or regulation. But that's a wishy-washy article, to be perfectly blunt. It also carries very minor penalties, and he can attempt to argue that he thought that it would be, this regulation is unlawful on its face for all the reasons that we will probably get into later about it being potentially discriminatory and all these other things. At any rate, I don't think Starfleet would charge him under Article 92, and they can't charge him for accessory after the fact.
I will add that there's a legal ethics analogy here, that lawyers are supposed to follow the law, that we're not supposed to advocate breaking the law. That's not something lawyers do. But if you believe a law is unjust and unconstitutional, you can take that case and you can represent that client. That's how laws that say you can't marry someone who's not of the same race as you get found to be unconstitutional, because somebody has to challenge and being able to say two people who are of different races can get married. A married couple should be able to get birth control. The fact that there's a state prohibition against that, a lawyer has to be able to challenge that. By analogy, that's similar to Pike being able to go, I don't like this.
Yeah. Yeah.
I do
And
want to also highlight that someone has to also, many times because of the way that standing works and all of these things, in order to actually challenge an unjust law, you often have to wait for it to be enforced, which means that you need someone like Una, or in those historical cases, someone who's actually willing to break the law and let the state start to move against them and charge them with the crime in order to have that fight in court. That this law that the state is trying to put me to jail with is unconstitutional or is unjust and those kinds of things. So I do want to emphasize Una also being a legal hero as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have a question before your next question. Can I?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there a difference? Do you think it makes a difference, the fact that she maybe didn't do the augmentation to herself, but it was done to herself?
So because we don't, I did try to look it up. I don't have the text of this law to analyze. But based on what happens later with Dr. Bashir, I presume, and things like that, my understanding is that it is probably not based on the person having actually participated in any way in the modification, which is one of the many reasons, but that's probably the biggest reason why, this is a bad law.
It's discrimination, right? I mean, like you were
100%.
You didn't do that to yourself. I mean,
and
you were.
It's certainly unjust. We generally try, laws generally try to seek to punish actions, not being, not something that you had nothing to do with. And so, yes, I think that there is a very good argument to be made here, both legal and policy. So, like, if you're arguing to change the law, this is one of the best reasons to do so. Is like, it's absurd that you would punish someone for something that their parents did to them.
Mm-hmm.
Good.
Again, analogies of people brought illegally into the United States. There were prohibitions on someone who was brought into the United States as a child from becoming a lawyer, saying that they couldn't pass the moral turpitude test because of their citizenship status. That changed in California because we had someone very brave who went to law school and, again, grew up thinking he was an American, and our state adjusted the rules for it.
Yeah. And I do have to say, like, the augment law is very specific. I mean, not the law itself, but the reason that they put the law in place is very specific to Khan and the eugenics wars. Like, the fact that they are extending that law to any augments that they may find in the galaxy as they're trying to build the Federation just seems a bit ridiculous.
Like the law itself was just a reactionary.
Yeah,
move.
exactly. Yeah.
If I could play devil's advocate just for a second.
Yes.
Well, I think that the law as a whole is terrible. Don't get me wrong. People need to get rid of this law. If you did have the law structured such that it only applied, for example, to humans or people who were part of the, United Earth at the time, you would actually have another discrimination problem on your hand then.
No, that's a great
because
point.
The law is supposed to, under the Equal Protection Clause in the 5th and 14th Amendment, you're supposed to treat similarly situated persons the same. There's additional layers of legal analysis about, are you treating someone differently because they're a member of a suspect class? And one of those suspect classes is national origin. So if you had a law that was allowing genetically modified people to serve if they're from another planet, but not if you're human, you also run into a problem there, which is not to say that means you keep the law. Get rid of it, but it would create more problems.
There it is. I do want to talk about number one, maybe having a couple things going for her, because her Illyrian augments did prevent Chief Engineer Hemmer from beaming a chunk of the planet's core on board the Enterprise. That would have been number one that destroyed the Enterprise. Number two, La'an decided to overload the warp core to feel the heat on her body. Ultimately, because of space science and Star Trek, that created antibodies, which created a cure from her augmentations. Can these items possibly help her beat these charges? Like, the fact that they use what her augments did for good?
So kind of, in a very significant way. And this is something I think I mentioned at the beginning of the show, which is that these considerations are something that lawyers call equities. It's the fairness of it. And the fairness of it doesn't necessarily factor into the question of, did you perform certain acts? Did you have certain intent or mental states when you performed those acts? And so it doesn't necessarily factor into whether or not she is guilty of the things that she is alleged to have committed. However, there's at least two really important ways that it does factor in our justice system and presumably in Starfleet's, which are what I'm going to call prosecutorial and judicial discretion. So there are a lot of places in our legal system where people essentially have the ability to make choices, to exercise discretion. One of them is prosecutorial. there is nothing forcing Starfleet to bring these charges against Una. This is actually kind of a funny thing. In our justice system, for example, people have actually sued attorneys' offices, city attorneys' offices, and state attorneys' offices for failing to bring charges or declining to bring charges against someone, and it doesn't work. It doesn't fly. They get to decide.
Can I just interrupt you real quick, Nari? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Isn't that happening right now? And I mean, listen, everybody knows we're a very left-leaning podcast, but I still don't want to delve too much into it. But isn't that happening right now in Florida with what DeSantis is trying to do to one of the state's AGs for basically not enforcing the laws there?
Yeah, so although I think there's a more complicated relationship, and I'm not an expert on Florida's constitution and state organization, so forgive me.
No,
but
that's fine.
there's a different relationship between members of an executive branch, right? So like the president, for example, is the attorney general's boss. If the attorney general doesn't bring a charge that he thinks he should bring, he can fire them. Things like that. But it's different from us as citizens believing that, you know, this person has committed a crime. We think they should be charged. There's a certain element of, let's call it, how do I phrase this? Prosecutors are supposed to pursue justice. It's one of the things that is rooted, prosecutorial discretion is rooted in, and it may not serve justice to bring charges, even if the prosecutor thinks that they can prove those charges beyond a reasonable doubt. And so that's exactly where all of the things that Una has done that are great, all of the reasons why she is an asset as an officer, should have factored in before they arrested her, to be blunt, because again, there's no one forcing their hand to do this as far as we're aware. And it doesn't mean that they have to continue this. My guess for how this is going to go is that they will at some point, you know, realize that this was a mistake and try to withdraw or drop charges. But in any rate, they did not need to do this. So that's area number one where those considerations can come in. The second one is in sentencing. So anytime you get sentencing, there's a wide range of penalties that people can impose. This is true in military courts. It's true in civilian courts. It's even more true probably in military courts for reasons I'll get into in just a second, because it's relevant to the prosecutorial one as well. But essentially, there are only 2 crimes in the Uniform Code of Military Justice that carry mandatory minimums. That's something that I'm sure people have heard because it's politically salient. But mandatory minimum penalties that a court martial, a tribunal, will have to impose if they find the person guilty of it. And it's just 2 classes of crimes. It's murder and rape. And that's it. Everything else, there's maximum penalties, but the court martial could let you off with literally a reprimand. And so in this case, I have a hard time believing, as seriously as the Federation has taken its anti-genetic modification directive, I have a hard time believing that they're going to put it in the same category as murder and rape. I seriously doubt there's a mandatory minimum sentence, which means that even though discharge or imprisonment may seem appropriate to some people, they don't have to. And presenting the evidence of all of her heroism and the asset that her augments have been may factor into that decision, in which they'll just allow her to continue to serve.
Yeah. And I mean, you look at that, I maybe Hawk mentioned, I forget who mentioned it at the beginning of the show, but it's the Admiral Kirk situation, right? Stole a starship, committed mutiny, you know, destroyed a starship without Starfleet's permission, a whole list of things. But like, take into account that it's like the 1 trillionth time he saved the world. They're like, we're just going to demote you and give you a starship when, you know, any other time we'd probably, you know, throw you out of Starfleet.
Yep. I would add that there are 2 views of justice. There are those who have the view that it's supposed to be just, and there's the view that those who want laws with teeth that should always be enforced to ensure compliance. So charging Una could be under the laws with teeth, that we just don't want augments around and we want to send a message. Now, sentencing might be light, or they might throw the book at her, but that could be the rationale with bringing the charges of, this is something that we do. When the zero tolerance policy came down a few years ago for people seeking asylum in the United States, a federal judge that I knew described the policy as hitting the weakest the hardest. and to send a message. And that was a policy decision. So Una could be facing a policy decision of, we're going to hit her hard because we are that angry.
We want to send a message.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That we don't tolerate this no matter how brave you are. So now every Star Trek series has at least one trial episode. Deep Space Nine had a trial every season.
It's true. Yeah.
Strange New Worlds hasn't yet, but it looks like we'll see one early in season 2 because of this.
Yeah. We've been talking a lot about the fact that, this is pretty discriminatory, knowing what we do know, right, of the Illyrians from the 3rd episode of Strange New Worlds. They were trying to get rid of their augments so they could join the Federation, which is, I think, like a pretty big deal. Could Una use that in her defense, that, this is discrimination as an argument, because they were trying, like, they didn't want to be augments anymore because they wanted to be part of this bigger universe.
It killed them, by the way.
Yeah, and it killed them. It literally killed. No, yeah, you're absolutely right, Draft. And it killed them.
So this is one of those times where it's not necessarily fun to be a lawyer, which is, I will say that unfortunately, I don't think that her defense would be allowed to present that as evidence in the trial. And it's because what we're talking about typically is, and she will, and I'll explain a little bit more later, I do think she has a discrimination claim, but it's based on her facts. It's based on the law that's being applied against her. And so I assume that the law that's preventing Illyrians from joining the Federation, period, is, again, probably a different law. It's not, presumably not Starfleet, but Federation, kind of like the one that is going to send, in the future, Bashir's dad to jail. So it would be a different law. If I were her lawyers, I would still try to, because it can project what, well, I'll just call, like, an optics, a narrative of a campaign of discrimination against Illyrians, or a campaign of prejudice against Illyrians. But typically that's not something that is going to factor specifically into the analysis of whether or not this directive, as being applied against Una, is what's called invidiously or intentionally discriminatory. However, again, those are all, like, really important facts that support, God, this is a terrible law.
Yes, 100%. Yeah. Anything else on Una possibly using, the fact that the Illyrians are gone, right? Like, they're not coming back. They even saved Pike and Spock on the planet.
Yeah.
Their essence, right?
That's just
like,
a colony. That's just a colony.
Okay, it was just a colony. I don't know. No, good point. Good point. Yeah, good point. Good point.
The internet tells me at least that there are multiple Illyrian worlds.
Yeah, good point. Yeah.
I also think that it's weird to just leave them. I think that a science team should get stationed there to save them.
Thank you.
I think Giraffe said that on the pod we were talking about.
That was my point. I was like, they just leave them. They know they're here and they just, like, bail. It's so weird. Yeah.
It's, again, Deep Space Nine. You have Bashir staying months on a planet that has a pandemic left by the Dominion. You Voyager with that WMD that left all the ellipsis.
Friendship One, right? Yeah. No, not Friendship One. What was it called?
I don't remember, because it's been over 20 years since
I know
I've seen
exactly what you're talking about, though.
But again, trying to reconstitute with the transporter, and there wasn't enough energy. And it's like, we'll give you the tech so you can try to keep working on this. Yeah. It's weird that they just leave. You think they would go like, we're going to have to send a team here, because those are definitely people,
right,
who are trapped in a state, and we shouldn't leave them as wraiths. Yeah. We should try to save them, because that's a very Federation thing to do.
Oh, it's totally Starfleet.
But it's second contact, so the Cerritos is going to take care of this.
The Cerritos,
90 years later.
Yeah, 90 years later, they'll be there. Yeah, they'll talk about those old science guys. TOS. Yeah. And listen, I know there's a lot of notes here, but we haven't even gotten to Carol yet, so I'm gonna kind of try and abbreviate this a little bit, if that's okay. Very simple question at this point. I mean, it sounds simple, but obviously it's not after everything we just talked about. But Una Chin Riley, guilty or innocent? How does this go?
Okay, I'll try to keep this as brief as I can. Here we go. So as I mentioned before, I think the two articles that we talked about before, which are fraudulent enlistment, false statement, I think she's actually fine. Like she's probably going to get they will probably prove their case on the fraudulent enlistment, but it carries such little penalty. It would not be crazy for Starfleet to let her off with a reprimand. What really matters here is the anti-genetic modification directive. And for that one, as we've been kind of hinting at over the course of this conversation, I think Una does have a constitutional defense here, which is to argue that the directive is unconstitutional. I'm assuming, as I always do, that the Federation has something like the 5th and 14th Amendment. In this case, equal protection clause, equal protection under the laws for all persons. And that's either what lawyers call as applied. So as applied to me, this is unconstitutional because it has the effect of precluding every Illyrian from serving. Or you could also do what's called a facial challenge, which is there is no constitutional application of this law. It is unconstitutionally discriminating against genetically modified persons. Now, to try to fast forward through this as much as possible, I think her strongest case is actually the latter, which is the facial challenge, which is a harder case to win usually because you're asking the court to strike down the law rather than simply say you can't enforce this law against me specifically. But I think it's potentially stronger because if she can get over this first hurdle, which is just, is genetically modified persons a suspect class? And I think she has a really good case. And I think she can clear that hurdle because even though traditionally in our body of law, genetically modified is not a traditional suspect class, suspect meaning, race, national origin, religion, things of that nature, there is a meaningful argument, I think, that it is a race. There's a meaningful argument also that it is what's been called in the Supreme Court precedent a discrete and insular minority. And in that case, that almost certainly is within the Federation as a whole. Genetically modified individuals are undoubtedly very small because they don't let people join if they are, and it's highly criminalized to do so. They're very identifiable. You can find out who they are by doing a DNA scan, which apparently is quite easy to do in the future. And in that case, if she clears that hurdle, you get to what lawyers call strict scrutiny, which means that the tribunal at that point has to examine the law with the most exacting level of review to determine if this law is valid. And it does so by essentially asking the government, can you show that you have a compelling interest that's being furthered by this law? And is this law very narrowly tailored just to advance that interest? And the answer here, I think, is no. And it's first of all, I don't know that there's a super compelling interest here because, the eugenics wars were a long time ago. I'm not so sure. I'm not convinced that this specific law is actually going to prevent the eugenics wars. But even if I grant that preventing genetic modification is compelling interest because otherwise 90% chance we're going to get more eugenics wars, even if I accept that that's a compelling interest, I would argue, and I think she would win on this, that it is not narrowly tailored to that. There are already Federation laws, as we know from the at least future episode of Dr. Bashir, I presume, that criminalize parents or impose criminal liability on parents who genetically modify their children. That is a big disincentive. Most people find the threat of jail time a very serious disincentive. I think Dr. Bashir's dad spent like a few years in a penal colony in New Zealand.
Same as Tom
granted,
Paris.
New Zealand is nice, but but still, that's no joke. And again, in that case, that law is targeted to the person who is undertaking the act. There is no way to disincentivize a person from having an operation done on them as a child or in utero. I get that you're disincentivizing the parents because you're going to exclude their children from all kinds of benefits and they don't want to do that to their kid. I just think it is over-inclusive. You're including people who have done nothing wrong, and you already have plenty of other ways to disincentivize it. So that, I think, is a reasonably strong argument. It also puts Starfleet in the really uncomfortable position of arguing about this issue head on.
That's a great point, too.
Yeah. I think they would shy away from that, to say the least.
Or
Nari's right.
Yeah, I know. I'm like 1,000% convinced at this point. So
I'm gonna dumb it down a lot. I'm really sorry, But for me, it was really I went through the rabbit hole of women who enlisted in the army before women were allowed to, and like would like dress as men and try to hide the fact that they were women. For me, it made me think a little bit of that, like hiding who you are to be able to, serve and do something that you really believe in. And even if you're very good at it, like some of them were imprisoned, were kicked out of the army, executed. And that really made me think of this because they didn't change the law, right? It had to come like way later. And I'm wondering how the Una's trial is going to lead toward a change in the law. So that's what I'm very curious to see in
I want to
changing
highlight
laws.
one other real world example that this, to me at least, strongly evoked, which was gays serving in the military prior
Yes.
to them being allowed to do so openly. You were put, if you were a homosexual individual who wanted to serve, you were put in the position of either fraudulently enlisting, because at the time before Don't Ask, Don't Tell, it was one of the questions that you got asked, or not serving at all. So it's one of those things that it serves to highlight just how unjust this particular law is. I'm a little worried that the law is obviously going to stick around unless they like break with
Oh,
canon.
right, because
Dr.
Bashir. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
What I hope will happen, though, is that what sometimes happens with laws like these is that they just never enforce it again. Maybe until Dr. Bashir, but
And even
I'm
with
a little,
Bashir, there's like ulterior motives, right? Because Section 31's like highly involved in that. So
totally.
yeah.
And there's a good point on the chat too. They say, are we presupposing that Una will actively fight it? I could see her pleading guilty and Pike backdooring something to keep her out of prison. Like the stigma may be that heavy that she may don't want to fight it because she finds herself guilty to her own
Right.
eyes. That's an interesting question. I think she'll fight it. Come on, it's Star Trek. They need
Yeah,
to fight in court.
Plus, there was, the great John Byrne comic with, with her as a Commodore in command of a starship, and I want to see that. So definitely want to see that.
Yeah.
And I will just add very briefly that I hope she fights it as well. And it sounds prosaic, perhaps, that it's because there's meaning to having your day in court.
Exactly.
And to be able to have her give her testimony, to have Pike give testimony in her support, and to tell the story of how important she's been to them and to the fleet. I hope that happens, even if it turns out that she does get found guilty. Those things are important. There's courtroom testimony and arguments that get made, even when they lose, that years later will get pointed to. Maybe one of the tribunal members will dissent and give us a dissent that later it turns into a majority opinion.
Yeah. Hawk.
So for Una, I mean, the fact that she lied on her Starfleet entrance application, that there's not much getting around that. So maybe she's guilty of that. As far as what she lied about, and that she was lying because there was a bad law in the books, and the whole thing with the augmentation, I kind of keep going to the abortion issue in my mind, because they apply this law that's like one size fits all, without realizing that there are so many shades of gray that go with the subject itself. And that, with Starfleet and the anti-augments law, it was because, what they had created, and that almost, destroyed the world. But then again, like augmentations can take on like, many different kind of shades, and that, we get down to the Illyrians, and that it's just like, it's a really wicked, immunosystem, which, again, it could be an augmentation in that, but it's not what they had in mind when they framed the law. And that, this law came out of fear.
Listen,
and
I know it's like the kind of a lame argument, but it's like Vulcans are, superior to humans. It's not an augmentation, but like no one,
at least in some ways.
Right. Like no one's, putting Spock on trial for like eating pirates across the bridge, because they have super strength and could do like all these things that, augments could do. So there's, the Spock Vulcan argument as well. Klingons too.
Or
yeah.
Klingons, if we want to get into Klingons and that,
Yeah.
all the redundant organs and that could be considered augmentation.
Yeah.
I think you have a really good point. I didn't really think about it directly that, these laws were presumably passed in the late 90s or early 2000s.
Late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah, 200 years before. Yeah,
long before people had gone to the stars and met other planets and all this stuff. This is just another reason, like, it is beyond me why this would not only been on the books, but since it's Starfleet code and presumably Federation code have been renewed, have been added to the books, especially because it's this. As far as I know, we're the only planet that would have had this experience. I don't know that the Vulcans had any experience with eugenics wars or anything like it. So yeah, it's bizarre that we're sort of taking this one really bad but experience that Earth had, and then just saying the rest of the galaxy shouldn't do it either.
Yeah. But I mean, there are parallels here on Earth. No descendant of Napoleon Bonaparte can go into politics in France.
What?
It's true.
Yeah. So
I even know that. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you play that game, it's like, I can't run for city council because of what my great grandpa did. Thanks.
Yeah.
Like, so
I'm a half Corsican, so.
There go your ambitions.
Yeah. So again, there are things like that happen, but that's extreme.
Yeah.
So
also, to be blunt, I don't like that Bonaparte law either. Come on.
No, it's nuts. I mean, people got nervous in Italy when Mussolini's granddaughter ran for office. So, granted, that's a little closer, but yeah. So like there are instances where people make bad laws based upon fear.
Yep.
There's you guys may have heard the saying, bad facts make bad law.
Yep.
Yeah, it's just internment of Japanese Americans. Like there's a long list of we screwed up because we were scared.
Yeah. I mean, listen, obviously we're gonna find out what happens, in maybe like the next year or so. Hopefully it comes out sooner rather than later. Nari, your expertise on this has been amazing. So thank you for that. Let's move on to we're going up a rank in Captain Freeman. It is Starfleet Command versus Carol Freeman, Captain U.S.S. Cerritos. She will most likely be accused of planetary destruction, genocide, and probably a whole lot of other charges. It's pretty fucking bad.
I want to see the law for planetary destruction.
Yeah, right.
It's the size of the planet.
We're just gonna call it genocide. Yeah.
So you can destroy Pluto.
Yeah, Pluto. Yeah.
Was that like Klingon, like little planet that gets blown up?
God.
Like
Praxis.
Praxis.
Yeah. Josh. Just like we asked Nari, are we missing anything? Does this about sum it up?
It about sums it up, and this one's a lot easier because it's not a facial challenge to a constitutional law that has discriminatory intent. It's a good old-fashioned trial.
Yeah.
And there are two ways to attack it. There's pre-trial and then there's trial itself. So I will prefix this with the fact that I do civil litigation. So getting to talk about probable cause, this is just a treat. So there's this concept of writ of habeas corpus, that if you get arrested, you have to go before a judge and you get the charges read to you. This is the first line of attack to go after why she was arrested. You can't arrest somebody without probable cause. And that's from the Fourth Amendment. And because of the way that she's arrested, they clearly have something analogous to the Fourth Amendment. Now, for those who don't remember civics, the Fourth Amendment says the right of the people to be secure in their possessions, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and nor warrant shall be issued, but upon probable cause, supported by an oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the person or thing to be seized. So it was Placid Planet blowed up, and we're accusing you of collaborating with Klingon extremists to do so. So what's the evidence to support that probable cause? That first hearing is the first time that we get to smack that around, because, okay, you got some images. There's something that you could do with computer forensics to attack them and go like, when were these taken?
Yeah. Yep.
Who took them? Because they have to be authentic. So attack all of that there. It's like attacking a red light camera picture, which is not testifying because it's a computer. Computers don't testify, so they don't have hearsay issues. It's a printout. But you can go, did this operate correctly? So you could try all of that at the pretrial stage to say that there's no evidence to support the allegations against Captain Freeman. On the flip side, if this thing does go to trial, this is the opportunity to break a prosecutor over your knee and make them regret doing this.
Yeah.
Because it's time to lawyer up at this point with, okay, so you have these images. Where did they come from? What's the chain of custody? What's the metadata on those images that show the time and place that they were taken? Who took them? When were they taken? If they were taken by, say, a spy satellite, does this make it analogous to the aforementioned red light camera? Then the issue is, did it work correctly? Who worked with that information? Now, keep in mind that with a criminal trial, you have to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. And with a genocide on the table, you got to swing hard to prove that burden. If I were, again, the captain's defense attorney, I would subpoena the bird of prey cheetah's logs, because that ship was seen with the Placlid battle cruiser.
Well, and then also probably the Vulcan cruisers, which name I don't have the top of my head, their logs as well, right?
Yeah, and probably be easier to get the Vulcans, but
Twitch chat, tell us the name.
Yeah.
You get
Nari
it.
already
That's how
does.
we do it.
I rewatched part of the episode this afternoon. But the point is, I would go after that and start subpoenaing the now acting captain and want him on the stand to testify to what happened, because that's just weird. The only thing that we know from the Cerritos' point of view is the Klingons and Packlids were together. They fired upon the Cerritos and the Vulcans. Captain Freeman reported it to Starfleet, and then she's the one accused of conspiring with the Klingons. That does not make sense.
Nope.
So keep building upon this. Now, to talk about the rules of evidence, evidence has to be admissible. So if we can knock out those images and so they're not admissible, that would be very handy to making the charges go away. So the first step in something coming into evidence is it has to be relevant. It has to prove that it is what it purports to be, then it's something of a factual consequence to the action, because we don't want irrelevant evidence coming in. Then you get into the issue that the probative value has to weigh its undue prejudice. So again, like there's no log entry from Freeman saying, I hate Packlids and what they've done.
No,
like,
there's no like smoking gun from Captain Kirk saying, I'll never trust Klingons, I never will. Right, I'll never forgive them for the death of my boy. Yeah.
Yeah, nothing like that. Which again, unfairly prejudicial. Now, granted, the counter argument is, well, it's super prejudicial because it's super relevant. So like that's the balancing that has to come in. But you don't want something that's just going to inflame the jury and make people freak out. So that's step two. Then you get into authentication, which means you have to have somebody who can testify and explain the thing is what it purports to be. Well, those evidence, the photos, wherever they came from, somebody has to testify to them. And that's the person to grill. Where did they come from?
Yeah.
What's the timestamp on them? How are you accusing Captain Freeman of collaborating with Klingons when she was the one ordered to go to Paklid Planet in the first place to negotiate with the person who was wearing the biggest hat?
Yeah.
That's such a dodgy story. Like this whole like photo thing.
Oh
in the
no, it
future. This is so
totally
weird.
is. No, it totally is. Listen, no, go ahead. Go ahead.
So examination type questions would be, what data did you collect in this case? Where did you collect that data from? Such as, we would say a laptop or a smartphone, but was it a spy satellite? Was it an espionage ship that was out there surveying Pakled planet? How did that photographic evidence get collected? What collection device did you use in performing that collection? What training do you have to perform that collection? How many data collections have you performed using that collection technology? And just go down the line and start poking holes. The other part of it is rip apart the facts, because we do have the log entries, and you have people who can say, this is when we went to Pakled planet. This is when we fought the Paklids and that Klingon bird of prey.
Yeah.
So poke the holes, and it's an old-fashioned trial at this point of who do you believe, and does the prosecution meet their burden of proof that beyond a reasonable doubt that Captain Freeman used a WMD with Klingon extremists to blow up Pakled planet.
Yeah.
Which I don't know if I can repeat fast.
No, and that gets kind of to my point too, right? Like we all know Carol's innocent. The viewers know, the crew knows. I'm sure most people in Starfleet know, that this is outrageous. But let's as Nari did earlier, let's play devil's advocate for a second. Let's say Carol Freeman went fucking crazy and blew up Pakled planet. And then going back to Michael's trial after committing mutiny, sentenced to life in prison. Starfleet does not have the death penalty because it's fucking archaic. But once again, looking at military law, if Carol is found guilty here, I mean, she probably would have been, put to death, right? For that kind of thing. What's maybe, or at least life imprisonment? What is she?
We did hang war criminals after World War II.
Yeah.
So
I mean, they killed, I forget how they killed Osama, but they killed Osama too. So yeah,
a lot of bullets.
Yeah, a lot of bullets. What's the sentence for an act such as genocide at least for Starfleet standards? So
with the Nazis, they were hung. So for those that we executed, others were thrown away into a prison in Germany, and that's where they rotted. So a couple options there. And I might sound a little hawkish on this, but that's...
no pun intended.
I
Sorry, Hawk.
On foreign policy. So the issue is the facts have to support that. And simply saying like, oh, she blew up a planet, prove that she got a WMD working with Klingons, and that used the rescue of the Artemis as a cover story. That is so extreme and unbelievable that they're banking on our jury being psychotic and accepting those facts.
Fair. Totally
so
fair.
It's like, now granted, there are fact-resistant human beings out there, but I would take that to the jury that they do not prove beyond a reasonable doubt that she did this crime.
Gilliand, if I can also give you, as I want to do, a legal citation for your question.
Yes, please.
18 U.S.C. Section 1091 defines genocide as an offense under federal law, and the punishment for that is if the result of your genocide is death, imprisonment for life, and a fine of not more than $1 million, or both. We will presume that Starfleet, like you said, has evolved and does not have the death penalty, but imprisonment for life. If death did not result, then a fine of not more than $1 million or imprisonment for not more than 20 years, or both.
Yeah.
Wow. Genocide on that. Wow.
Well, because it has to be you tried,
right?
Nobody died.
Okay, all right.
That's under American law, right? But like there are the international court in La Hague, right?
It has its foundations there. So when we did the war crimes trials after World War II, it was Hague Convention, and in other international law. And I highly recommend reading Justice Jackson's opening statement. So the lead prosecutor, from the Americans was a Supreme Court justice who took a leave from the Supreme Court to go prosecute the Nazis. And his opening statement took 2 days. And it is amazing to read for crimes of this magnitude. So it's phenomenal. And I'm not going to try to, have quote it from memory because I can't. But that's the type of foundation that you're going to have for Freeman, and being able to say that she committed genocide with a hostile planet that was at war with the Federation.
The last thing, if I could just add, that genocide does carry specific intent, which is, I think, going to be super hard to prove here. Specific intent meaning they have to prove not only that Captain Freeman destroyed the planet, and, sure, we'll assume they can prove that, but also that she did so in order to exterminate Packlids as Packlids. It wasn't that I was destroying the planet because I believed they were a threat to the Federation, and so I took out a threat. You have to prove that she wanted to commit,
that it was a prejudice, right?
Yeah, you have to essentially prove that she meant to try to exterminate the Packlids. And that's why there's that second, in the U.S. code at least, there's the second lesser offense, because you can try, you can fail.
Right.
See,
but it's really focused. It's one of those laws that's perhaps unusual because it's really focused on that mental intent.
Yeah, it goes back to me. I did my whole junior year in high school. I did my big project that year on the Rwanda genocide. So that's always stuck with me.
To lighten the mood, I'm just gonna say that our
Please.
our Twitch, they're all following the Legal Geeks now. They're like, oh, I'm gonna listen to the podcast.
Yes, adding to the rotation because
like,
you guys rock.
They keep saying like, oh, they're so good. Oh, they're excellent. Oh, that's so good. So
kind.
You guys are getting a lot of love in the chat tonight. I'm gonna keep the mood light too. I'm gonna move it kind of more like Star Trek centric instead of more the law. Yes. This is digging into section 30.
Light.
Yeah, this is digging into like section. Well, it's still not light because we're talking about section 31 now. But we
like a triple.
Not light at all. We know from last season, right, that Rutherford has had memories on his implant that he is not supposed to have. Is Carol's arrest maybe step one of trying to remove an obstacle so they can get to Rutherford? I mean, we know how protective Captain Freeman is of her crew. And
that's a question I can answer. That's good.
Yeah, go do it.
I don't know. I have no idea. I think like Lower Decks has been like so dodgy about like their storylines. Like I forget there's a storyline about this, and then comes back and I'm like, oh yes, I need to rewatch the whole season because maybe there's something else. So I don't know. I don't know at all. Like they don't give us enough. Like even me who like makes up like so many stories all the time. I think maybe I would see something more to get to her husband. He's an admiral.
Yeah.
For me, that would make more sense, but I don't know.
Yeah.
That's a really interesting theory.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't put it past gross incompetence for the Packlids to wipe themselves out, but that doesn't explain why the Federation would then try to pin Captain Freeman for the fact that they load themselves up.
It's a big thing to accuse someone of just to get to one ensign who maybe has a few memories that he shouldn't. I mean,
and especially because like there is like a very self-explanatory thing, as you said, Josh. They blew up themselves, and like even if one of their captain was like really guilty trying to do something, I'd feel like, hey, they blew up themselves would totally stand, like. Rather than like prosecute the captain of a California class. Like it's such a weird angle.
It's not like it's the captain of the Sutherland, O'Brien's old ship.
Yes, with Captain Pressman, yeah.
Who decides to go out and fight Cardassians, and Picard at the end says, we're watching and we know that he's right. Like it's not that
line. I love that.
Yeah, it's like it's not that situation. And Section 31 probably would go with if they did the kill strike, they would make it look like the Pakleds did it to themselves. Like they wouldn't pin it on Carol. So that tends to go to, are the Klingons trying to frame her, which would make more sense that you would have rogue elements within the Empire.
Yeah, because the Empire have been trying to find ways to start a war with the Federation.
Josh, I don't know. Klingons are famous for their subtlety.
Yeah, and
no sarcasm there.
But and granted, Martog wouldn't do that. And
True.
The majority of the Klingons don't do the Romulan thing with a sneak attack of some kind. They'll do their blunt. So, but we do know there are duplicitous Klingons. So I could see that. Are we looking at the Romulans?
Thank you. I was gonna say yes.
The Cardassians are in no shape to do anything at this point in history. So
and in the trailer of season 2, we see a Romulan ship.
Sure do.
And when what's his name? Rutherford has like all these like blank memories, you know, when he's going like from one thing to another, the Gorn wedding. He is actually talking. There's a whole Romulan subplot that we don't really understand. So I would not put it past the Romulans to actually be behind everything and just like me puppeteering everybody.
Listen, it could be the biggest long game of a TV series ever. The Romulans have been in the intro for Lower Decks since season 1. So
true.
And we
oh my God, that's true.
And we've only seen them once.
Yep. You know who I hate? Remans. Oh yeah, they're awful. I love them.
Hey, listen, I'm so happy that New Trek is giving me more Romulans. I'm like, bring it in, bring it to mama. Come on.
The fact that both of these shows and with cliffhangers that hint at trials just was I don't know if they're writing love letters to us. If they are, I appreciate the chocolate left on the pillow. It is very, I don't normally get flowers, but I'm very grateful.
You'll have to do an acceptance speech with all those flowers too. Hawk,
Thank you.
Did you have anything to weigh on this before we move on?
The only thing I can think it's like you have to look at motive, because like who would want the Pakleds destroyed?
Who would profit from Carol Freeman being imprisoned too?
It can't be that Carol did it, that out of because she thought the Pakleds were a threat. She's had so much experience with the Pakleds, and that even when they're being a threat, they're not a threat.
No. Oh well, I mean, dude, they did like straight up destroy a Federation vessel. Like they were bad enough that they had the Titan and Will Riker going after them. So, they're not a threat.
It's just they're dangerous.
I think the term is malice tempered by incompetence.
Malice tempered by incompetence with the backing of a rogue Klingon captain is, kind of what it comes down to, right? Finally, kind of just knowing what we know about the Pakleds, their secret deal with the Klingons, logs from the mission. I mentioned this earlier that we saw the Vulcans come to aid the series. You said about subpoenaing them to get the logs.
It's the name of the ship, by the way.
Josh, I feel like you've already answered this question tenfold, but I'll ask you one more time. Freeman has a case here. It's pretty cut and dry.
She's extremely defendable, and that's awesome because you could have a knockdown trial of like, bring it on, and it's been a.
Were you going to make an Enterprise joke there? Because you can.
No.
Oh, okay. You said it's been a long, and I was waiting for a long time. So
that's why I stopped. But again, Enterprise does have the best trial episode because it's the only one that actually gets to a judgment.
That judgment?
Judgment.
We talked about it last week. Yep.
I know. I listened. Second is Rules of Engagement is an exceptional trial episode. It's by the book and perfect, but it doesn't get to a resolution. Because the nefarious plot is discovered.
That happens so much with episodes, and that happened in Dax. It happens in Court Martial.
Drumhead. You don't know what happened to Simon Tosses. They never tell you.
Yeah, so Judgment's the only one that has a full trial. Everything else is resolved without actually having a verdict. So it's part of the reason why our presentations that we've done on judgment that are on our YouTube channel cover it. And one lawyer actually did how she would cross-examine Duras. So there's a lot of fun stuff there. But I'm hoping that the premieres for both of these come out swinging. And I
Yes.
promise you, Nari and I we will be recording about Lower Decks, and because we covered all of seasons 1 and 2 together. So,
And we remain available to consult if anybody
Yeah.
wants.
We will definitely be listening to those episodes because you guys have knocked it out of the park tonight. I mean, dare I ask the question, because I think it's cut and dry at this point, but guilty or innocent Carol Freeman?
she'll be innocent.
She'll be innocent.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's
Innocent.
no, yeah.
For me,
Yeah,
the
not-
most exciting thing is to know who framed her. And I think
Yeah,
that's what is driving season 2. Like, what happened here?
Which is why they might not actually get to a resolution, because if they actually, do the traditional trend and trek of, the conspiracy is exposed and you don't get the actual resolution, they've done that for most of the last 57 years.
Yeah.
So, but it'd be fun if it's not guilty, and then it's like, let's go find out who did this. That would be
I-
another switch.
One of our friend, Mariah from Discovery Pod, was having the idea that season 3 is gonna start, and they're just gonna absolutely ignore the plot and just be like, oh yeah, she was cleared, and then continue their merry way. And I was like, oh my God.
That would be so Lower Decks. It would
But
be
It
oh,
would.
so
I'm
Lower
now
Decks.
really
Yeah.
worried that's what's going to happen.
But then they released the trailer, and like they talk a little bit more about it. But like when she said that, I was like, oh my God, that would be absolutely brilliant.
You couldn't put something like that past Mike McMahon. Hey, listen.
Who
go
does
ahead.
respond to us? He has responded to us.
He's
on Twitter.
great. Mike McMahon
Yeah.
is a wonderful human being. Just fantastic. Before we move on to mailbag, there's one quick question in the chat from Haven. Didn't Worf's trial have a judgment at the end as well? His discommodation trial did, because he gets discommodited.
Oh.
Um.
I thought they were talking about rules of engagement.
Oh, maybe in rules of
No.
engagement as well. Oh, is it?
No, rules of engagement doesn't get there because of the conspiracy is revealed of
Right.
what a very unlucky ship to crash twice with all the same people on it.
Oh, I love that. I love that.
So, which again, great cross examination. It's like, mwah, Cisco, well, favorite captain. Even though Pike might be taking that role.
Oh,
but,
yeah, he took that a long time ago, but I do love me my Cisco.
Yeah. So, anywho, where we're going with that is good possibility.
Yeah. And I would say that it does have a judgment if we're talking about his discommodation hearing, because
Yeah, and like that's a cultural thing that's different. I mean, we're talking about the Klingons all crossing arms and turning
yes,
around.
yeah.
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 That I wouldn't call that a trial,
No.
but it's something else.
Yeah, I usually hesitate to refer to the non-Federation legal proceedings, although I'm sure there are some great Vulcan ones. As
I'd love
trials.
to see a Vulcan trial. Like I was gonna
I would
say,
too.
I was thinking, I was
Oh.
like, that must be so insane. And I hope we're gonna see maybe some with T'Pring in Strange New World,
With
because she
Cybok?
rehabilitates criminal, and I think that maybe we'll get a Vulcan trial, and I would love to see that.
Yeah.
So
That would be
much.
fun.
Sorry, NY Raleigheites mentions, doesn't Measure of a Man have a verdict at the end?
Yeah,
does.
I was thinking
Yeah.
the same thing.
It
yes,
does.
I suppose that one was not a criminal trial
It was a
per
hearing.
se.
Yep.
But it
Yeah.
was a judicial proceeding that had immense importance. I guess I'll just like plug myself and Josh just a little bit, which is, civil lawyers do important things too. And a lot of those important cases can be civil proceedings. Yeah, I would say that was a culminated legal proceeding.
good.
Author has a result as well. So again, it's not that it never happens, but they're the exception and
Yeah.
not the norm. The two artificial life forms get resolution, not full recognition, but they at least there's a resolution there.
I just want to say, before we get into mailbag, Josh, Nari, this has been just absolutely fantastic. I feel like I'm much more in tune with how law works after this one in a way that I never have. And I have lawyers in my family, so that says a lot. So thank you for all that. Hopefully you guys, if you don't mind, would like to read some of the mailbag as we get into that as well. Let's get into it. It is our subspace to poll and mailbag.
Hailing frequencies are open.
And
Hailing frequencies are open.
Twice.
I keep
Yes.
taking it off the loop, and
Again.
it's like Nichelle wants to is beaming down on us,
Yes.
saying like, "I want to hear my
Yes.
voice some more. Keep playing it, please."
Yes.
We had 2 polls this week, both asking Trek Twitter what the outcome will be of both of these cases, and this is what they had to say. Nari, you handled Una's trial here for us at the top of the show, so why don't you go ahead and read this poll for us, please?
Sure. So 30% of you said she would be found guilty. 12% of you said she would be found innocent. 15% said it would result in a mistrial. I do find that an interesting possibility that I hadn't analyzed. I now regret I should have analyzed. 43
Episode 3 of Drumhead.
Yes.
Yes. 43 of you said it would result in settlement, which I think is actually pretty insightful in the sense that I think, as I hinted at, there are not resolutions to this that are not simply a finding of guilt or innocence. They could result, for example, in Starfleet deciding to withdraw the charges. So I think the audience's instincts here are spot on. There's a chance that she's going to be found guilty because, like, I think Hawk and the rest of us have been discussing, the fraudulent enlistment, it's just there. You can't get around it. Probably would have almost no penalty for that, though. But as to the rest of it, I think there's a really good chance here the Starfleet is going to change its mind, that it actually wants to go through with this.
Nice. And Carol's trial, Josh, if you could take that one for us, please.
Happy to. So 6% said guilty. Good trend. Off to a good start. 61% said innocent. Technically not guilty, but okay. 23% said mistrial, and that would, since we haven't seen the trial yet, that confuses me. 10% said settlement. Yeah, people frequently plea out, but this is one of those that I do think you take to trial. And there are a couple other notes.
Yeah.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to get into some mailbag, and we'll go in the order that I have it on my screen. Sorry for those on Twitch who can see all our Zoom controls now. For some reason, they're not going away, so you get to live with it.
Party.
Oh, it's not anything private, but
that's how Strange
That's how Strange New Pod rolls when Eric's
it's like
not here.
Like a DJ showing you what they're doing on
exactly.
the
Like, I'm not. I shouldn't have done that. I'm not a DJ, nor do I want to be. I have mad respect for DJs. Hawk, why don't you take it with Fernandez, please?
So Fernando wrote, I find it interesting that in the new shows, only the women, Burnham, Freeman, Una, are put on trial.
Can I answer that?
Yes.
I mean, true. But we went from shows where there were a lot of men captains who were put on trial to shows where the cast is way more diverse.
True.
So I think it's actually very interesting to see women put on trial too. But yeah, I think it's the law of statistics, I suppose, with New Trek. More women on the bridge means more people being put on trial. So I'm actually very interested in like these 2 seasons like ending in this fashion. So let's see.
I totally agree with you, Giraffe. I think this is actually a sign of immense progress because, there's just so many more women in making really important decisions that they can then be court-martialed for.
True.
After the success of Orange is the New Black, they just,
such a good show.
Yes. Janeway ends up in jail, so
Red. Gotta love Red. Oh
Red.
My God. Draft, keep going with Cassie's, please.
Cassie wrote, considering genetic augmentation is still illegal in DS9, I don't think Una's trial is going to go well. Here's my wild guess at the verdict. Starfleet makes some kind of exemption for Una while maintaining the overall ban on genetic augmentation, and she resigns in protest.
I'm happy to respond to that one, which is I think you're generally right because we know that there's still a ban on it by the time you get to Deep Space Nine. I think that there's one other possibility for why Starfleet will decide to eventually withdraw the charges that I didn't get to before because I was trying to keep it concise. So I'll take this opportunity to mention it, which is it is possible that Starfleet is going to realize that this is the case that is going to render it unconstitutional because the facts for Starfleet here are so bad. That they'll just decide, you know what, we actually care about this genetic augmentation law, and so we don't want to risk it getting determined to be unconstitutional. So never mind, everybody go back to what you were doing.
Mulligan.
Mulligan,
Sorry.
yeah. Why don't you keep going with Haven's mailbag, please?
Haven wrote us, who would I pardon out of everyone in Star Trek? Just as a joke. Wait, no way! I would pardon Tuvix. Okay, as a joke. But on a serious level, I would pardon Kai Wynn. Interesting. I truly believe she was brainwashed. So if we could pardon her and see who the true Wynn is, I want to believe there is actually some good in her. You know, that's a really interesting idea. I'm happy to let someone else talk about it. I do think that, you know, there's a lot of value in mercy. That's ultimately what a pardon is. Like, a pardon doesn't necessarily mean you think they were found guilty by some kind of miscarriage of law. It can just be, I think mercy is warranted in this case.
Yeah, are we talking Kai Wynn at the end, or the Kai Wynn is
I think
having
just
suicide bombers at a school?
Yeah, I think we're just talking all Kai Wynn, but
yeah.
The school thing that I was like, wait, what?
Or the, you know, hey, can you replace the other half of his brain? I'm not really that sympathetic towards a religious figure who was really not following the better angels of her nature. So, I mean, at the end, she does have the redemptive moment with Sisko.
barely though.
Barely, and that's
yeah. I'll talk about this one because I hate Kai Wynn. Kai Wynn is everything I think is wrong with our country right now, and separation of church and state. And
she's right about archaeology, though.
Fair,
I'm
true.
gonna get to her.
that one time, she is literally like the mega church pastor in the situation, right? It's not for the benefit of Bajor, except for the archaeology. It is for the benefit of her own personal gain and how thick she can get her pockets. She doesn't care about Bajor, and if she does care about Bajor and the prophets, it is in a sick and twisted way. Do I agree that people do deserve mercy? Sure, but listen, she bombed the school. That's strike 1, 2, and 3, and 4, 5, and 6. Like. You don't do that. I feel like there's no redemption for.
I mean, you can be brainwashed. I mean, like, I understand like deprogramming people
of religion,
extremism.
of extreme.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I do think that Kai Wynn does not fall into that.
No, I don't. No, she was the one doing the brainwashing.
I was gonna say that exact same thing. I find it harder to believe if you were the leader of a religion.
Yeah. That you're the one doing the brainwashing. Yeah.
Josh, if you could take Takakos, please.
Sure.
There's one before, no?
Oh no, I'm sorry.
Right.
I forgot to put a space. Take NY-relates, please. I'm sorry. There's a space.
Sure.
I missed the space.
It's okay. I have a similar take as Cassie that the Federation will continue to ban genetic augmentation while finding a reason to allow Una to stay in Starfleet. I do think the price, though, will be she's told she won't be promoted. Headcanon-wise, this could explain why we don't hear Una being mentioned like Kirk and Pike in shows set in the TNG era and beyond. I think the reason we didn't hear her name was because she didn't have a name. And so there's that Bechtel thing. But I don't know. I like the John Byrne comic where she's a Commodore and has her own Constitution class ship.
Yep.
They're gonna play a discovery on her. They're gonna be, she's stricken out of the record, like we don't remember her, and that's why nobody talks about her.
I hope
the
not.
latest.
I really hope not.
Starfleet's big. There's a lot of ships and a lot of captains. So
Yep.
True.
I'm going to take Takako's. I'm fairly certain Carol Freeman will be acquitted, but not before some lower deck shenanigans, because you can't have lower decks without shenanigans. As for Una Chin Riley, I vote mistrial on the Twitter poll. I doubt any panel would be able to reach a unanimous verdict. Some compromise will have to be made, permitting her to continue to serve.
Oh, that's bold.
I could see it. I could see that, like if there's a jury of her peers, I don't know quite how the juries work in court martials, but can you come to, a good verdict for that?
well, the charges are going to be, it'd be jury nullification, like at that point of going, we don't agree with this, so we're
Right.
going to do the not guilty because we disagree. Lawyers ethically can't argue jury nullification because we're not supposed to. So if it's that type of extreme situation
Right.
where the jury is taking the law into its own hands, that fits TV canon.
Yeah.
But I don't. I would prefer that's not the answer.
Yeah. Hawk, take us home. Take us home with Wainers, please.
Wayner wrote, Freeman was framed, man. Sorry. And very likely by the Klingons, trying to make it look like she was supplying the Packlands with single-use torpedoes. Once Bradward and Mariner steal the Cerritos and rescue her, they'll be able to clear her name while saving the galaxy. As for Una, I agree they'll find a way to let her stay in Starfleet.
I do love the optimism of mostly everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's nice to see faith in the legal system.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
The
Yes.
courts will reach the right result. So that's
Yeah.
always a win. So it's like, thank you. Good.
Yeah.
Maybe she's gonna start the Fenris Rangers. Who knows?
Hey, I like
Hey!
that. I like that. That
Really quick, I just wanted
Yeah,
to
go
say I
ahead.
did some fact checking for Takako. I haven't had a chance to research this exhaustively, but I believe in most cases, a verdict does not have to be unanimous in a court martial.
Okay.
I think there are certain classes of offenses where it might be, but since none of these are like murder charges, probably doesn't have to be unanimous. So I do agree though that some compromise will probably be made.
This has been just like an incredible episode of this podcast. Nari, Josh, I want to thank you so much, because I mean, I don't know if you guys are following along in the chat, but people have loved all of your analysis. It has been absolutely amazing. Before we go, I want to give you guys the opportunity to plug away. Where can people find you? What do you have coming up? Anything you want. Hit it.
We're always in your hearts. So you can find us there.
Oh.
So you can find us on thelegalgeeks.com, social media at The Legal Geeks. My Twitter is also Bowtie Law, that I tweet personally at because I wear bow ties. I'm
Bow
easy to
ties are
shop.
cool.
Yes, they are. And I was wearing that before Matt Smith. So again, there's a lot. You can find us there. We don't have any shows planned. We just finished Comic-Con where we had 3 panels. And we should
She's a pro.
We should get the video from our Jaws trial soon, and look forward to getting that posted. And I'll post our Law and Thunder panel about Doctor Strange and Thor very soon. I just finished moving, and I haven't had a chance to do that yet. So that's where you can check out our further adventures.
I love your tiki glasses.
Yes, I do love the tiki glasses. Yep.
So I moved the Kirk and Spock ones down low, but higher up.
Oh wow! Nice. So many tiki glasses. Oh, I see I see Bo-Katan as well.
Yeah, so one half the walls all Star Wars over here, and with 3 levels. Treks up on the top. So McCoy and the Klingon, the Noble Mogatu, are up there. King Ghidorah and King Kong. Then we have Thor, Captain America, and Doctor Strange. And the Kenobi and Max Rebo are on the way.
Nice.
Nice.
Awesome. Nari, how about you? Any shameless plugs?
I guess so. Not unfortunately, I won't be able to make the first one, but the second She-Hulk podcast, I should be joining for that one because I really don't want to miss She-Hulk. It's rare that you get an opportunity to talk about a lawyer in fiction as opposed to what we normally do, which is layer on law onto things that don't ask for it.
Yeah, and we have to figure out, we'll have double duty because She-Hulk and Lower Decks will overlap.
They will, yeah.
And then we're going to get Andor towards the end of
Ooh, an
September.
Empire Law. Yes.
So we're there's about 20 lawyers that we have who like to blog and podcast. There's like 6 of us that want to talk She-Hulk, and there's probably 4 of us that will talk Lower Decks. So we're gonna have a busy August and September. So
that's awesome. Well, we can't wait to listen. Looking forward to those. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode. It has been so much fun. With that, I will say our month of New Trek exile has come to an end. When we return next week, we will be back with our review of episode 301 of Star Trek Lower Decks. I forget the name of the episode, so I'm not going to say it right now, but I will announce that Vindicta herself, the Borg Queen of Puns, is returning as a special guest for our season 3 premiere. Brittany Tomes joining us for that one. Can't wait.
One of our former hosts.
One of our former hosts. We will bring that to you next week. So I will say for Nari, for Josh, for Hawk, for Giraffe, I am Julian. Live long and prosper. Majram, and good night.
Thanks for beaming into our podcast today. If you want to keep the hailing frequencies open, you can subscribe on Apple and Google Podcasts, YouTube, and Spotify. Like what you hear? Put in a good word with Starfleet and leave us a 5-star review.